Hello, and welcome to our latest Business Green webinar. My name's James Murray. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Business Green, and we're delighted today to be hosting this hour-long discussion on a smart, flexible grid. What does it mean for you and your organisation in association with our partners today at the Energy Networks Association? Thanks so much for joining us. This is, as you can imagine, an absolutely fascinating topic, a bit on the technical side for some, but hugely important. And of course, it could not be more timely. We've seen just in the past few days the government and National Grid talking about potentially trying to expand the idea of flexible grid services into the home as part of its measures to try and curb the huge energy cost challenges that households and businesses across the UK are facing. And of course, more broadly for the business community, this is one of the hugely valuable tools in the armoury that could help organisations curb their energy bills, support the net zero transition, and enhance energy security at a time when I think everyone's painfully aware there are very, very significant challenges to be faced in the coming months and years. As mentioned, this is a fully interactive webinar. I can see some questions have already come in, but please do keep your questions coming in throughout the session. The way it's going to work is we're going to start with a short presentation, then we're going to have a bit of discussion with our expert panelists, so I'll be introducing shortly, and then we'll move on to your questions in the second half of the hour and try and get through as many of them as possible on this topic of a smart and flexible grid. As mentioned, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers for you in the coming hour. Shortly from now, we'll be hearing from Avinash Atal, who is the technical lead for the Open Networks initiative at the ENA. We're also delighted to be joined by Simon Cox, Energy Smart Appliances Policy Lead at BEIS from the government. Tom Luff is Senior Advisor for the Energy Systems Catapult. Emma Carr is Principal DNO and Data Consultant at Electrolink. And last but not least, Nisha Doshi is the Flexibility Markets Manager for the Oxfordshire programme with SSE. So we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers, some working on the policy side, some working on the big picture side of flexible grids, and others working on the ground, actually delivering some of these really exciting and important projects. But to get us started, I'm going to hand over to Avi Atal from the ENA, who's going to give a bit of an overview, a bit of an introduction to the current state of play in the smart and flexible grid sector, a bit of an introduction to what it means for you and your organisation, and also talk about an important consultation that's underway from that Open Networks initiative. So Avi, for the next few minutes, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you, James. I will just bring up my slides. Well, yes. So as James was saying, my name is Avinash Aithal. I am the technical lead and head of Open Networks here at ENA. And I'm here to introduce the Open Networks and perhaps signpost the flexibility consultation that's now live on the ENA website. Perhaps before we go to the deep end, for those who may not be familiar, so ENA is the trade body that represents both gas and electricity networks within the UK. This is for both distribution and transmission, and including the system operator. So on behalf of our members, ENA leads a number of areas of work to inform and implement changes that are required to deliver net zero ready networks in the future. So one such initiative that we are leading right now from ENA's perspective, that I am currently leading, is the Open Networks. And this Open Networks is an initiative that kicked off 5 years ago. We are in the 5th year, and this is a program that is spearheading the transition and implementation of smart and flexible energy system in the UK. And this has been, working in the background to kind of proliferation of the flexibility markets in the background. And as much as I want to say, our story of success is something on the screen here. The Smart System Flexibility Plan calls out Open Networks to deliver some of the key actions that they have called out in order to deliver the flexible networks. And if I draw your attention to the figure on the slide here, so this tracks the kind of growth of the energy flexibility services market in the UK, just kicking off from 2018, where there was almost none of it. Right now, we are at a world-leading status of nearly 3.7 gigawatts of tendered flexibility as of 2021-22, and of which I think 2 kilowatts are already contracted. So that's a huge success story for GB. And we, within Open Networks and across individual network companies, are always committed to improving liquidity and overall supporting the flexibility markets for both all domestic and industrial, and just as a net zero journey as a whole. I've called out one such initiative to improve accuracy in the flex service providers is the baselining tool. That's something we've launched this year and it's live on the website, which helps flex service providers essentially measure the flexibility that they're going to be dispatching. That's a useful tool and free to use for everyone. And jumping in then, so as a part of the program, what we do is we kick off a flex consultation each year. That's right in the middle of the year. What we do is we set out the key areas and recommendations of all the areas of work that we've undertaken this year, gather stakeholder inputs, and hopefully have them feed into both strategic and technical inputs onto the questions that the product teams have. And then this is an opportunity for us to learn from subject matter experts out there and also help us shape our overall program deliverable going forward. Helps hopefully we can address some of the barriers that are currently getting in the way of the liquid market. So this is something that I would encourage everybody on call or even outside who are interested to log in and take a look at. There are fairly detailed questions in there that cut across multiple, as we call it, within the program. And the next slide I've shown you here is that you'll have an access of the different products that we are working on this year that cuts across broadly into 5 areas. One that is pre-procurement, during procurement, settlement, information sharing, and the overarching framework for flexibility. Although I don't intend to go into the details of the individual products right now, I encourage all of you to go through the flexibility document, which sets out the details of all the work we do and the questions we have on those specific topics. In any case, this is a handy kind of prop to show all the different areas that we are working on or focusing on this year. So having said that, in terms of next steps, then what we would request you to do is, take a look at the questions and respond to it on or before the 12th of September of this year. So this is an opportunity for us to, gather all the inputs and take that on board. So what we will do is we will use these inputs, acknowledge each and every one of them, and publish them along with our responses to the feedback we've received. Also, I'd like to flag here that we would like to hear both positive and negative, because sometimes negative would helps us improve our work, but also it's good to know if you're doing the right things as well. So even if you have to say just yes, we agree with everything you're doing, that is just as encouraged as well. So I would definitely request everybody to do that if that's of interest. And I think I want to leave you with a kind of a quick overview of what we at the ENA and all our network companies are doing together in this space, because Open Networks is a program that employs learn by doing approach. So we work closely with several key industry network innovation projects out there. We've called out some of them here. For example, WPD's Flower, which works on flexibility or working with water utilities. And then there is Project Leo, which is working with local communities for trading of capacities. Then there's CrowdFlex and the ENW's project on the the domestic area of flexibility, how that can be captured. UKPN's stellar work on along with EVs, and of course the Northern Power Grid, Northern Ireland Energy Networks initiative on flex as well. So these are the kind of different flexibility areas that we are keeping an eye out on, working closely with. And I think hopefully you'll have an opportunity, if you go through each of this, you can have some say in this matter and learn some more about the space as well. So I'll leave you with the final slide, which has some key links which might be useful in this discussion. So I hand it back to you, James. That's it from me.
Excellent, thank you, Avi. So just to, I suppose to summarise there, I mean the market's going well. I mean I was surprised to see it's up to sort of 3.6 gigawatts. It's expanding rapidly, but equally, as Avi says, the ENA really keen to hear on both why that's going well, the things that are going well, and also the challenges that still exist, the areas in which the market could be moving faster, and how they can be potentially overcome and eased, so we can get more companies involved in the flexible grid. And to discuss why that's such an attractive proposition, delighted now to welcome our panel. As mentioned, we have Tom, Simon, Nisha, and Emma from a range of different experiences on this front. Tom, I'm going to come to you first and ask you to sort of maybe set the scene. So you work with Energy Systems Catapult. I mean, first up, for those who don't know, who are Energy Systems Catapult? And then as an opening question, could you just, for anyone who's watching today who isn't maybe aware of the terminology, what is a flexible grid and why is it so important? Why is it such a sort of significant part of this net zero transition?
Thank you very much, James. So yeah, my name's Tom Luff, and I'm a senior advisor on electricity markets and policy at the Energy Systems Catapult. And we're based in Birmingham. We've got sort of 200 innovation experts working to really try to unleash innovation and open new markets to capture kind of opportunities from clean growth. We're independent, not for profit, and we try to take a kind of whole system view to bridge gaps between different sort of stakeholders in the sector. We've been doing some work actually on a lot of this stuff as part of a program called Rethinking Electricity Markets to try and sort of unlock innovation and new business models. So fundamentally, the net zero changes, the net zero transition changes everything. So we've got three, I would say, really big trends. UK is making great progress in building new renewable generation, but that sort of variable, intermittent renewable needs to be complemented with flexible assets, such as things that can help balance the system. So storage, demand side management, flexible generation. The second thing I would say in terms of scene setting is that move as part of net zero is bringing on a lot of sort of decentralized and digital energy assets. So a lot more stuff being made or energy being made away from the big centers, and also so things like electric vehicles and heat pumps, which can be kind of flexibly used, but many of them is a sort of decentralized way. And then finally, that move overall of massive electrification. So we need more electric heating, we need more electric transport, which will put massive strain on the grid unless we can find more sources of flexibility. So huge opportunity there, and central challenge is about unlocking that flexibility. So I'll
in the
stop
current,
there.
and sorry, Tom, just very quickly, in the current climate, big potential cost savings here as well. I mean, that's always been part of the pitch.
Absolutely. So, just in terms of scale, I mean, yeah, it was amazing to hear what you're talking about in terms of approaching 4 gigawatts of local flexibility being tendered. I think according to Bayes, we'll need about 30 gig by 2030 across the piece, but that's a lot. But that could create savings. Bayes have talked about 10 billion pounds a year in avoiding the need to build out lots of reinforcement and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Gas we don't need to be burning, which is obviously in the current climate and current prices a very attractive thing. Nisha Doshi from SSE, come to you next. Go to the other end of things, talking about the big picture. You're involved with projects on the ground. You're a flexibility manager in Oxfordshire. Can you just give us a bit of background on, when we talk about this, what does it look like? What does a scheme that enables flexible grids actually look like? What does it deliver for companies that you're working with?
Yes, sure. So Project Leo and both Project Transition are the two SSEM projects that I'm working on at the moment that are trying to design a local flexibility market. The Project Leo is more specifically about trying to enable local energy resources to trade energy, and it's allowed us to quantify and mature, engage local flexibility within the region of Oxfordshire. And that's been very useful in understanding how people's needs in terms of local businesses in providing flexibility. So they don't always marry up with what the DSO needs are, and trying to work out how we can create a market that is commercially viable for us as a DSO and for local participants has been really useful. Project Transition is symbiotic with Project Leo, so they very much support each other. And that has been about setting up the requirements for a flexibility market. And this has included the trading platform, which is often known as the Neutral Market Facilitator, the NMF, and also the data exchange requirements that we need between us and local businesses, and the trading opportunities and how we can make sure that the participants in this get the most revenue from these DSO services they can provide us. But these projects have been critical in understanding how we as SSEN operate as a DSO in the future. And as you said, it's really vital to understand what kind of prices we can accept and what prices people are willing to pay. So that's been a big part of the project. And that's very important for reducing customers' costs. So that there might be times where reinforcement is better than flexibility, but we as SSEN have now committed to do flexibility first, but to reduce customers' costs. So we will look and see where we can deliver flexibility. Also, as a DSO, we want to encourage people into the local market. So we are offering now any provider £500 who pre-qualify onto our dynamic purchasing system before the 30th of November, and as long as they meet the eligible criteria. So we are really trying to encourage liquidity into market to help bring down costs too.
Just a follow-up question on that issue. I mean, that sounds fascinating. So you obviously got a £500 initial payment for people who come in and agree to, save power at given times. What kind of scale of savings are we potentially talking for businesses or organisations that do partake in this market? Because obviously, companies, particularly small businesses, got a lot on at the moment, to say the least. Significant challenges, but how easy is it to access this, and what kind of savings or revenues are you talking about if you do get involved?
So that's one thing we're trying to work out from Project Leo. That's been one of the big things that we will hope we'll report on from this project. But the savings can really vary, and it depends from business, and it will depend on the region. And one thing that we are trying to look at is how we can simplify getting onto this into these markets, how we can reduce maybe the contractual requirements, make getting into the market and registering a lot more simpler, because these are not businesses who are dealing with trading energy on a regular basis. This is not a core part of their business, so they have to supply additional resource to get into these markets. So yeah, we don't have figures to say what their savings would be, but we are trying to work out how we can reduce the resourcing requirements on local businesses to facilitate them into these local markets.
Absolutely, and obviously any saving a good saving, and obviously savings that are getting bigger as energy prices are going up, which is a fairly obvious truism, but one that people sometimes miss. Next up, I'm going to come to Emma, Emma Carr from Electrolink. Hi Emma, thanks for joining us. First up, for those who don't know who are Electrolink, maybe that's a good place to start. And then also sort of similar question to you, I suppose. I mean, how big an opportunity do you see here? How significant is this market? And what's your experience of companies starting to get involved and starting to take advantage of it? Oh, hello, Emma. Can you hear me? Have we got some technical issues? Oh, there we go. It wouldn't be a webinar if there weren't some technical issues at some point along the way. I think Emma's connection's just dropped out, but oh no, she's back now. Maybe can we go to her now? Hi, Emma.
Back now, so sorry about that. I just thought I'd do a quick refresh because I saw it dropping out. So a lot of people don't know who Electrolink are, so hopefully you can hear me.
We can, I can indeed. Yeah, go ahead.
That's brilliant. So Electrolink own or provide a service, and we're owned by the DNOs, and we provide a service for around nearly 25 years for meter data, and we operate a data transfer system. But in addition to providing that meter data, so anything with the dumb meters and anything with the INC, it's not the smart meters. We also are looking and provide data solutions, data infrastructure products, and looking at ways to use data and get the appropriate consents from the data owners to be able to really unlock the benefits. And I think we see, like everybody else and what everybody else has discussed, there is a potential benefit for flexibility in both a planning and forecasting space for network operators. As we move to be able to get more real-time data, there is definitely an opportunity for information to drive sort of operability. But one of the key things to unlock all that benefit is actually having access to data that is in a usable form, is over not just, because at the moment it's quite disparity, it's quite across each individual DNO and system operator do things differently, or it's recorded in a different place. So being able to access that data and be able to draw the insights to understand and support the network companies with sort of real and sort of historical insights is really key for us. And we think data first will then definitely drive the ability for people like the ENA Energy Catapult to develop ideas, develop products, and to sort of drive those real benefits, which will help us, which we're all sort of seeing now, for value for customers.
And how technically feasible is this now? Because, you know, a few years ago, this was sort of a bit of a, you know, I hesitate to say a pipe dream, but it was sort of something that was envisaged. It was quite cutting edge. I mean, we're now seeing some energy providers providing this in the home. They're you know, you've got your apps that match your supply to demand. You're seeing, as Avi mentioned at the start, you know, multiple gigawatts of businesses tendering into this market and promising to match supply and demand. I mean, the data's there now, isn't it? It is technically feasible. There's some challenges, but it can be done.
So there is a hell of a lot of data out there at the moment, in different forms, not always consistent, so you can't always draw the insights. But there's also a lot of projects at the moment and innovation work looking at how can you use the technology we have today to unlock those benefits and unlock where you can get access to those data. I think the key challenges from a data perspective is obtaining the consent from the data owner, so particularly consumers, keeping that consent up to date because of GDPR, but then also being able to put it in a format which allows people to compare and understand, to be able to make the best benefit to offer those products, services, not only to support the network companies, but also to inform consumers about how they can get into that market. And I think having a way to try and join those up and looking at some of the innovation work, particularly that BEIS are doing, that will be great, because that will help then everybody to have that transparency and visibility. And I know it's a bit of a buzzword to say transparency and visibility, but that is actually going to be really key. There are some barriers, which are both government, technical, and sort of the comms network, but they're not impossible. And if the prize that we can see for flexibility networks there, for consumers, for net zero, we need to invest that time and work together in a collaborative way to be able to do that.
Absolutely. You mentioned government and policy there. So Simon, I'm going to bring Simon Cox in from BEIS. Thanks so much for joining us. I mean, obviously, this isn't a new market, or a relatively new market, and it's also growing fast. Obviously, a huge role for policy to play. I mean, can you just give us a quick overview of BEIS's current thinking on the importance of this market and how to grow it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's been flexibility has been a government priority for some time now, and I think that was trailed back in the first Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, which I think was from 2019. But since then, there's been a whole suite of policies and proposals and an updated Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan that sets out the strategic importance of flexibility for many of the reasons that have been described already. You know, I think the opportunity and the benefit is a good way of thinking about it. But to flip that on its head, another way of thinking about it is also that the cost of the energy system is going to go up enormously unless we have a much more flexible energy system in the future. Given that consumers are going to be decarbonising their demand, getting low carbon transport, getting low carbon heat, and we're decarbonising our power supply, the energy system will be much more expensive unless we make it more flexible in the future. And so government is really focusing on using flexibility as a tool to deliver an energy system that is both low carbon and low cost for consumers. In terms of some of the recent policies that have been announced, the one that I've been specifically involved in is a consultation entitled Delivering a Smart and Secure Electricity System, proposals for the interoperability and cybersecurity of energy smart appliances and remote load control. The consultation is about as snappy as the title, I'm sure, if not snappier. But that consultation is all about putting in place the future technical and regulatory and delivery frameworks in the 2020s, such that the benefits of the flexibility can be realised in the 2030s, when hopefully consumer uptake of smart appliances and associated services really accelerates. And so some of the proposals in that are around standardising aspects of how EV charge points, heat pumps, batteries operate, such that a consumer can use them with different appliances, standardising how certain data is shared for flexibility, and also putting in place a broader regulatory framework around organisations that are offering demand side response services, such that consumers will have the confidence to participate in flexibility and use their appliances in a flexible way without risk of detriment. So quite a few overarching regulatory frameworks put forward in that in that consultation that will be implemented across the 2020s. The other consultation that I think I have to call out that I'm not particularly close on, but is really important, is around the reform of the electricity market arrangements. If we can characterise the first smart and secure flexibility consultation as being around the technical frameworks needed on appliances and organisations, the REMA consultation is all about the markets and the incentives that ensure that organisations are getting financially remunerated for accessing flexibility, and that financial remuneration can get passed on to consumers. So that conversation is all around reforming the wholesale markets, reforming the ancillary services markets, such that flexibility is valued appropriately, and that value can get passed on to organisations and consumers.
Absolutely. What would be the message to businesses sort of going into this winter on this? That because it strikes that there are these demand response services available. There are ways of kind of helping to save energy, and also curb your costs by taking advantage of this market. I mean, presumably, the government's already signalled that it's really keen on this national grid proposal for a kind of consumer-facing scheme to get people to save energy at peak periods and incentivise them to do so. Am I right in saying there'll be a similar message going out to businesses to get involved?
Yeah, I think the more flexibility we have on the energy system, the better from our perspective. And so there is no time like the present to start to be providing flexibility and engaging in those new products and services. I think it's also important to recognise that the scale of what can likely be delivered over this winter to deliver some of those benefits, like the order of magnitude there isn't going to be significant compared to the challenge we're seeing on the supply side with gas prices and the like. So whilst I think the message is definitely now is the time to be thinking about flexibility and engaging in those propositions, we're also still trying to get a sense of actually, well, what's the scale of the benefit that can deliver in such a short time frame, given that in order to deliver flexibility at scale and deliver some of those really big numbers that are in other publications, that will take a lot more longer term development of policy frameworks, market frameworks, technical frameworks, and the like.
Absolutely. Tom, I just want to. I've got loads of questions coming in. Actually, quite a few. A few people have asked if this is going to be available to watch afterwards. The answer is yes. It'll be available on this link for anyone who's missed it or anyone who wants to rewatch it. So you can use the link to the platform to watch it again shortly after we've finished, and we'll probably put it on Business Green next week as well. So it'll be free to watch there also and reach a wider audience still. So please do take advantage if you want to watch back, or if you missed this at all. Tom, I'm going to come to you before I get into some of the questions from the floor. One of the potential challenges here is, some people will call this a flexible market, and other people, some of my colleagues in the media, might characterise it as energy rationing, or I think we're going to hear a lot of that over this winter as that cause of concern. And for businesses looking at that, that can translate into a concern of, if I sign up to a demand response commitment, am I actually going to be able to use energy when I need it, or is this going to curtail what I can do? How legitimate, how credible is that concern, and what can technologies and some of the projects you're working on do to assuage those fears?
Yeah, thanks, James. I mean, that is a big concern that we hear, and I think I would like to be able to persuade people that is not a problem at all, in terms of that's not the intention, and actually by doing some of the things that we're talking about, we want to avoid the need for any kind of sort of supply crisis, because fundamentally what it's about, it's about getting people to want to change their behaviour, and actually maybe they don't even need to change their behaviour because it'll be done for them through a sort of technology. So by that, what I mean, and already lots on the market already is sort of charging electric vehicles, where you plug it in overnight, and you don't really care when it's getting charged through the night, because so long as it's ready for you with enough charge that you've specified the next morning, it can be kind of charged a bit more slowly at sometimes and faster at other times. And I think fundamentally that's what I would like to see much more of. Where you're not changing consumer behaviour as such, but you're allowing the better use of the energy system, so that when the wind's blowing, the electricity is being used, and when the wind's not blowing so much, not so much is needed. So I think fundamentally, by giving people incentives, so that actually you get cheaper electricity if you're able to be a bit more flexible, and also by the use of technology, so that it controls, with your permission, but it controls your devices in the best possible way. That's how I would like to see things moving in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Nisha, again, someone who's working with companies that kind of organisations that are doing this. I mean, how do they find it? How do they find that experience? Do they see any disruption, or as Tom says, is technology making it a relatively seamless means of curbing your energy costs?
So I think there are two things. If we're looking at setting up these markets, both the DSO needs to take on a slight risk that, potentially we go out to procure services and we don't get, or we are not able to dispatch as much as we need. So we need to manage that in terms of our procurement level. And that's one of the things we're looking at, is how do we determine the reliability of assets providing to the service, because we can't expect them to always be there. We can't expect people to always be able to deliver. That's not the intention of these services. There has to be some flexibility of the DSO as well. And the other thing is the use of aggregators. So I think aggregators will play a very key role in this, because they have the portfolio effect, and they will understand based on their portfolio what their reliability is and what they can be assured that they can deliver. So I think there are two ways where we both need to look at the risk and how that's managed, both from the DSO side and maybe more from another kind of provider side as the aggregator. And I think technology, as Tom said, is going to play a very key part in this. And we've seen a few aggregators now join our project who have technology to automatically connect to people's devices in their houses. And they have to take into account that maybe someone won't turn off their fridge when they expect it to, or it won't work. And that's part of that portfolio effect that they see. So yes, I think this is and this will be an issue, but it should be managed by the DSO and not impact residents.
And Emma, I see you. Indeed, Emma, I see you're sort of nodding there slightly as someone sort of looking at the data closely. I mean, is that similar to what you're seeing, that there are ways of managing this, and actually, you're not going to be telling people, come on, turn things off or you're in trouble?
Yeah, I think what's really important is we've got all the different work streams in this space that are working on different elements. I think what will be really key to sort of being able to take some of this to the sort of next level is to really know where all of these type of assets that have really good impact in terms of flexibility, those who've got low carbon technology connected in their homes and industries. So people who have got, what I mean by that is sort of like the heat pumps, the EVs, the solar panels, knowing where those are. Those would be the people who may be able to offer different additional services around that flexibility. But then also, when we are using those services and working with people like Nisha and SSE and having that data, pulling it together to then actually look at the trends and the analysis of that data to say, is it reliable? Where identifying where could there be gaps? Using that data sort of to inform the best decisions, which can support the network operators, but also the consumers about understanding this new market. So I think one of our sort of mottos from Electrolink is data first. So data first will drive good decisions if you can be able to access it, and you can then understand more about what you might need or what isn't working. And I think that's one thing as an industry, we've got to be brave. We've got to fail fast. So if it's not working, let's learn from it and do something else and use that data to sort of underpin decisions to make the sort of the best outcome, because we're all trying for the same aim.
Indeed. And just finally, before I get to the questions from the floor, Simon, I mean, what can government do here to incentivise? You mentioned you've got consultations out. I mean, just give us a quick overview of what can government do here to accelerate things, to incentivise more people to get involved? I mean, is there, are there steps that can be taken to ensure people move faster and that this is a more attractive proposition to them?
Yeah, I think, firstly, just to reiterate some of the earlier points, I think it's absolutely right to say that flexibility is something that is going to be a kind of consumer action. It's something that a consumer must consent to, and therefore the proposition must work for consumers. It's absolutely essential that consumers can have their car charged when they want it, have their heating set within set temperature bounds. If it doesn't work for consumers, then we're not going to get to that scale. I think as policymakers, what's clear to us is that the market is in an ascent stage, and that the focus of the next 5-10 years is about taking flexibility from a kind of niche early proposition into something that is a scalable proposition. And when you look at, particularly from a domestic side, the amount of engagement there is with consumers in their energy usage, there is quite a long way to go in that. And so from our perspective, it's about putting in place the overarching frameworks and the guardrails almost that allows organizations to innovate within and establish the best consumer propositions. And so in the context of the consultation I proposed earlier, there's a view that kind of a minimum level of technical standardization will be required to ensure that consumers can have choice between different propositions, whether that proposition is from their energy supplier, from a dedicated aggregator, or someone else. Equally, putting in place organizational level regulations that ensure that that any kind of really material risks to consumers are protected against. But I think it's also really important to us that we allow lots of room for innovation and an opportunity for the best propositions to emerge, because at the moment we're not there yet in having those scaled propositions. And if we, if government over-regulates that market and constrains innovation too much at this early stage, I think we'll be cutting off our nose to spite our face and allowing those markets and propositions to establish themselves at scale.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've got loads of questions coming in. So I'll ask people to be relatively brief in their answers, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. Olivia Beak has asked, how can we improve the amount of flex tendered against what is contracted? And where is most of that flex sitting currently in terms of the different types of technology generation and the like? Who wants to have a go at that one? It's quite a big question, to say the least. Tom, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly, and this goes back to kind of the overall incentives. I think that it's brilliant. There's been a huge amount of effort and a lot of kind of success in scaling up these markets, and it's really encouraging. I think fundamentally there are some that it could be made more significant if we could see greater incentive, I think, for consumers to do this. So by that, what I mean is the way the overall markets work is there's some of that incentive is limited due to the market arrangements, and I think having a better way of showing when in the day you use electricity and getting the value of that to match the price a bit better would be good. And actually, as Simon mentioned earlier, the REMA, the consultation on electricity market arrangements, is looking into some of that, and it would be great to think that innovators in this space could engage with that and sort of see actually if we did make some of those changes, what the benefits could be, and to sort of get their voice heard on that. So I think that's one of the things I would focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question comes to you, Emma. It's about a question about data from Margaret Davis. She asked, it's an issue that's come up in previous discussions about flexibility, is the risk of consumers when they consent to the use of their data, and their concerns that maybe it could potentially be used in the future to maybe charge them more, or in other ways to market to them in ways that they don't want. What safeguards have we got, and how can consumers be safeguarded against their data being potentially used in ways that they wouldn't like?
So I think there's a couple of things. So there's definitely an element around making sure that the consumer understands what they're consenting to. So that there's definitely an education piece, and there's a role for us all to play in the industry to make sure what is needed to be required and how it will be used. And I think the other things that are really important, which Electrolink are working on, is around the governance. So linking very closely to what Simon said about having the appropriate body who has access to that data. They have strict rules and strict governance and arrangements, and they can only use it for that purpose, and that they are monitored and controlled. one of the things we have been exploring and developing is data trust, so that you are trusted to have that data, but it's also you have a wide range of stakeholders who actually approve what you can and can't do with that data and help you be governed. And that sort of, instead of it being owned by a particular one company, it's actually the data trust and those parties to that trust help shape what can and can't be done. And that then helps sort of give consumers those sort of reassurances. And I think this is something that the whole industry needs to make sure that we can clearly articulate the data that is being collected, what it's going to be used for, and also how it benefits sort of the individual, but also the broader sort of GB economy and the associated sort of services and stakeholders around it.
Indeed, big role for data at the heart of it. I've got so many questions coming in. This is a really interesting one. Nisha, I'm going to come to you for this because it's a really interesting question about a project. Kenny Cameron from Connected Response says that they're working with Wheatley GHA, which is one of Scotland's largest landlords. They've got 2,500 flats that have electric storage heating and hot water systems that can be charged dynamically, and you can move it away from nighttime charging only. If you charge the heaters in the afternoon, it completely eliminates the need for supplementary heating at the evening peak. There's probably 1 million to 1.5 million of these technologies in British homes. Substantial saving. His question is, how can we incentivize these tenants to change their behaviours? I mean, seems like an obvious step that people could be taking that would save money, ease pressure on the grid, help everyone. What can be done? Nisha, any views on how to make it happen?
Project Leo has worked very much in communicating and engaging and communicating with residents and trying to get them on board to some of these platforms. So I think it is about engaging on them and making sure it's kept as simple as possible, because we can talk in lots of different languages and get cross communication. So I think it's keeping the kind of incentives very simple. Things like maybe time of use tariffs, which then you use as an aggregation to offer to the markets, is something that can be used. So maybe these flats acting as an aggregator themselves and then offering into the markets based on time of use tariffs, so they can have a look at using those time of use tariffs, what's the reduction in demand at those times. So that there are a few ways it can be done, but I think the key thing is trying to engage with them at that kind of local level and make sure that it's all kept simple and understandable, and you're not putting out, I guess, difficult contractual requirements. It is maybe part of the supply service that is already in there for the charging of the batteries or heat pumps.
Indeed. So, but there are ways, as you say, there are ways of incentivizing, ways of getting people involved. It's just making sure the communication's clear.
Yeah, and communication's clear, and whatever that it's kept as simple as possible. So I think there has been projects where they have a switch that can be automatically controlled, and the residents can override that themselves. So there's no fear that potentially, as we've talked about before, that they will go cold or anything like that. But there's an understanding that someone else does the work in terms of understanding what that impact is. And if you have that portfolio effect of a group of residents, and then that is offered rather than asking each resident to sign up and offer individually.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got several questions. Simon, I'll come to you with these. Several questions about sort of the role of DNOs and kind of barriers to getting into the market, basically. So got a really interesting question from James Richardson. He says he attempted to start up a community distributed energy company where you'd have solar panels in a local area, and the intent was that you'd be able to sort of trade power between them. Excess production from one property would supply the next if needed. He says it became obvious quite quickly that they'd have to set up as a DNO, which is just not practical for a small community project. He asked what changes could be facilitated to enable more sort of community level projects to get involved in this space and remove some of the logistical and sort of technical barriers.
Yeah, so that's quite a wide question there, and there's lots of kind of different things that I'm sure government and regulators are thinking about in terms of removing some of the barriers for participating in flexibility. specifically at a local level. I think there are established projects like open networks and innovation projects that are trying to understand what are the right frameworks need to be in place in order to enable local flexibility. And as I've said earlier, there's trying to put in place those financial incentives as well will be a key part of it. But I guess I'm probably not too close to the detail on the specific mitigations that might be needed to enable that kind of local flexibility in there. But I'd be interested if Abby from Open Networks in particular has any kind of thoughts from a DNO level, as he might be a bit closer to the detail on that one than I am, I'm afraid.
That's a good point. Can I bring you in on that, Avi? Because you guys have done some work with community groups and trying to sort of broaden the market, I'm right in saying?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'll use the opportunity to signpost an event that we'll be organizing I think in early September. But in terms of the program itself, I think there are barriers at different levels, and within the program, we're trying to ensure that different communities or different flex service providers are able to sign on and then access that market. So that's part of the finer details of the different aspects of work that we undertake. But certainly that is a point that has been raised, and it's something that is in works right now, is something I want to say.
Cool. So yeah, watch this space, I suppose. But there are more and more companies more and more community groups that are doing it, because it is a way of boosting their revenue streams. If they're currently focused on just a community solar project, just selling power, this is a way of really maximising the returns on that. Got an interesting question here from I've lost it. There we go. From Bridget Amoruso. From Make UK, it says, manufacturing businesses being as high energy users are absolutely crying out for this type of approach. Anything that can save them and cost energy bills at the moment. She says, could we have a specific pilot with the sector, with the manufacturing sector? And we've got a related question about, what are the things that need to change in the market arrangements to make the market more open to industrial and commercial companies and consumers? It strikes as, I hesitate to use the cliche, but low-hanging fruit. This is something every manufacturing business should be looking at this in some ways. You could make the case. Tom, what work is going on there? You guys have done lots of pilot projects. You looking at manufacturing and industrial users?
Absolutely, yeah. And actually, sorry, just to revert back quickly. I think this relates also. It's tangential, but the point about community groups. Although it might be tricky to enter as an individual entity, at the moment, partnerships I think are going to be something that are really going to be valuable. So what the community group can offer might be something that the DNO really needs, and likewise actually with sort of established energy companies. So I think thinking about partnerships might be a really good way in. In terms of manufacturing companies, I think the thing about where we are at the moment is we're currently at the place where people think either I'm a flexibility provider or I'm not. And if you don't think you are, you probably haven't really even thought about it. But actually, I think in the future, everyone can provide flexibility. And I think the more you've got, the more energy demand you've got, probably the more value you can add. But with aggregation, it can all be added up. So I think the key message is there will be a really good role for you, a demand for you, and getting in touch with DNOs in the first instance is probably the best bet. But ultimately, we would like to see a system where these markets are just broader and easier for people to get involved with.
Nisha, do you have any examples of working with manufacturers, industrial companies on this front? Oh, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
We have engaged with some industrial customers to varying degrees of success at the moment. I think it's marrying up those opportunities with where they are able to provide flexibility with when we need flexibility. So what I would say is, if you can identify when you've got flexibility in your business, what times you can provide it, how long you can provide it for, and are able to come to us with that information, we can have a look at when we can marry it up to our needs as well. Also, there's potential to look at historic data. So DNOs now have the SC31 license, where they have to provide information on when they've procured and when they've used flexibility. So you can identify then potentially where it might sit well with the DNOs as well. And then also going to third parties, as Tom mentioned, going to aggregators, they can be very good at finding ways that potential routes to market that you might have not identified yourself, because that is their core business. So I think that that's another route that can be taken as well. But it is, I think, initially identifying that use of flexibility and when you can actually do it as your business and it makes sense for yourself to do. But yeah, we have had lots of conversations with industrial clients, and some have been successful and some not so, because we haven't been able to marry up those opportunities, unfortunately.
Presumably, though, as more technologies come online, it becomes easier. I mean, if a factory has storage or hydrogen or different approaches, then it becomes easier for them to access and match up that supply and demand without disruption. It might not be right for a company now, but it could be further down the line.
Yeah, definitely. And things like as companies maybe get more charging points in, they could maybe look at using those EV chargers there. We've had vehicle to grid companies join us, so that there are lots of opportunities coming on, and definitely with more kind of low carbon technologies, heat pumps, and the use of them, that we could potentially gain the flexibility from as well. There will be more opportunities. And also there'll be a greater need going into the future. There's going to be a greater need for flexibility because of the fact that we're going to have a higher demand on the network as we progress. And as we've said, the DNOs are committed to flexibility first. So yeah, there definitely will be more opportunities coming up. And we are looking, we have quite long-term markets at the moment. We are looking at doing more real-term markets, which might suit with businesses that have maybe more seasonal variety in their flexibility. So yeah, there's definitely going to be more opportunities coming.
Absolutely. We've only got about 8 minutes left, so we're not going to get through all the questions, unfortunately, but we'll try and forge through a couple more. The really interesting question from Alana Chesler, who asks about local authorities. What is the role of local authorities here? Presumably they could have quite a strong catalysing role and also revenue generating opportunities for them there. I mean, Simon, is the central government looking at how to work with local government on driving this forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think local authorities will play an essential role in promoting flexibility. Some examples of the role they play is around providing public charge points, for example. We're seeing, I live in London, and you can see at the moment there's massive acceleration and rollout of lamppost charge points, where there are public charge points that are owned, that are commissioned by the local authority, but typically a car is plugged into that lamppost and left there overnight. And unplugged first thing in the morning, and so it's kind of easy to see the flexibility potential of that as a public charging solution. Obviously, local authorities also have a role in, from a heating system perspective, for buildings that are owned by local authorities, whether they are large blocks of flats or elsewhere. What we're looking at a government side is around ensuring that technology works, that when new buildings are built either by local authorities or elsewise, that they have the right capabilities to be used in a flexible way. It's really the domain of the network companies and aggregators and organizations that sit there to develop the propositions that work for local authorities, such that it's easy for them to provide flexibility and get rewarded for doing so, and to pass on to consumers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a big question here. It's probably almost, I think we might have time for a couple more, but if not, this is a good one to end on. Martin Hunt, friend of Business Green, judge at the Business Green Leaders Awards, has a question for the panel. He says that consumers, small businesses and communities are really going to have to become active participants in a future flexible energy system, which is a huge sort of cultural change from what we've all been in the past, quite passive consumers. We just turn it on and expect it to be there. He says at the moment, getting involved in flexibility can feel complex, top-down, technical. And he says he's really interested in any future social compact between civil society and energy sector actors that can help rebuild trust, encourage participation, build momentum. For example, what conditions should civil society be demanding of government and energy businesses in this future energy market in return for their active participation and support for the massive changes ahead? He adds, a big question, I know, but it feels like it's missing from discussions around flexibility. Emma, that is a big question, but we'll start with you. I mean, this will require quite a big cultural change. How can I suppose that the entire net zero community, green groups and energy companies and policymakers, all work together to build trust in what will be quite significant changes.
I think there's a number of things that we need to do, and there's a number of projects that Electrolink have been working on, which are called Skyline and Clever. And I can say, rather than going into those now, I can give some details if anyone's interested. I think what we need to do as a collective is, I've been in this industry 22 years and it's complicated. And when anyone asks, and I bet you everyone on the call is the same, when anyone asks you, what do you do for a job? You roll your eyes and go, oh, please don't let me have to explain what the electricity industry is about and who is who and who is what. So I think one of the critical roles that we have to be able to get consumers to build that trust and to engage is to demystify it, reduce the complexity, try and educate some of the media, and this is a personal opinion, not sometimes when you hear sort of the BBC News, and I'm not picking on the BBC, but any news provider of media, the way they explain it, you can see the language and the complexity will breed distrust. So I think there's a role for all of us, from government through to all the providers, to sort of demystify it. And I think we've got a great opportunity. We all, well, most people carry a little mini computer in their pocket, and the technology and apps will be there to be able to help simplify it. And I think we need to try and unlock that to make things easy for people to use, because what you need to be able to do is, those who are really savvy will be able to understand it. Those who are less savvy will need to be able to understand, if you do this, you can get this benefit, and this is what is in it for you. And I think that's where we need to focus on that, what is in it for the consumer, to be able to get them to participate. And it's not just incentives, it's making it easy and understandable.
Absolutely. Tom, I'm going to come to you because we've covered some of Energy Systems Catapults in precisely this area, really, with sort of heat pumps and heat as a service and various other sort of technological-led approaches. I mean, what's your experience of, making it more accessible, getting people engaged in that way?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, one, I think there is a real importance of planning. So, I mean, sorry, this doesn't sound like a very engaging thing, but actually it's crucial. So this is about thinking about a local area and a local area energy plan, and working out between the DNO, the local authority, civil society and other players, what's needed, what the sort of timescales are, what people's role, what the different organisations' roles are. And I think, and we've done a bit of work looking at what those, we've got some guidance on what that could look like. But I think that's a really good way of making sure the people that should be involved are involved, and the roles are clearly defined. I do think also that there's a sort of fundamental rethink of what the role of an energy supplier needs to be, because I think over the next sort of 10-15 years, we will still need energy, and arguably the role of the supplier is going to become much more crucial in bringing consumers along. And so then understanding how and what will motivate consumers is, I think, going to be really important.
Indeed. Nisha and Simon, I'm going to come to you both on this question, because it is such a big one. Nisha, come to you next. I mean, what's your take on that question of, getting civil society involved, as well as getting multiple stakeholders together to drive forward what as everyone agrees is quite a big change in the way we engage with the energy market?
Yeah, definitely, and that's what Local Energy Oxford is trying to do. And we've worked with the City and County Council to identify areas where we can find flexibility, and we have used things like libraries to provide flexibility, which had air conditioning units in it. There has been the Ofgem call for evidence on how local governments and the DNOs need to work together to get to net zero, and SSEN has put forward the proposal of having a local net zero coordinator, doing just as what Tom mentioned, coordinating and planning how we can offer flexibility and make sure that we are putting infrastructure in place that gives communities the best the best kind of sources of energy, renewable, and also allows them to have low cost supplies as well. And then also help the DNO in terms of offering flexibility when needed. So I think there definitely needs to be a coordinator role within that needs to be put in place. The other thing that Tom mentioned is suppliers taking a bigger role, and I think that definitely needs to be something that's looked at. Suppliers maybe need to offer more tariffs that have flexibility as part of the tariff, so people can opt in quite easily to provide flexibility to the DNO, but they do that via the supplier, and that reduces their distribution costs onto their bills.
Yeah, indeed.
So, yeah, I think that there are several things that need to be put in place.
Indeed, that cost-saving message definitely needs to get through. And lastly, comes Simon from obviously a big role for government here in establishing or building confidence that this is sensible, this is safe, this is what we need to do over the coming decade and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as is the case in many other sectors, there is a clear role for government in establishing the right guardrails for the sector and the right regulatory frameworks that ensure that risks to consumers and risks to the energy system are mitigated effectively. I think, just to re-emphasize a point I made earlier as well, that the market is in a nascent stage, and so ensuring that organisations have space to innovate and develop the best consumer propositions is also absolutely essential element of that policy framework. It is not government's place to figure out what's the best consumer proposition. That's what industry are really, really good at, and so it's important that we give space for industry to do that with those right guardrails in place, and hope that over time those compelling propositions and that market growth does. I think as a specific example that you touched on there in terms of safety, but is something that maybe hasn't been spoken about over the past hour. I think cybersecurity is an enormous, is going to be a really key part of that framework. That I think it's very easy to see how you can quickly lose consumer confidence and trust in a smart and flexible system if when they're getting their smart appliances, they are concerned about them being compromised following the cyber attack. Either at a small scale or at a large scale, and so ensuring that the system both works with consumers but is also very secure in protecting consumers and secure in the energy system is going to be absolutely essential to ensure that consumer trust can be maintained. Because I think, if there are examples of security issues, that will be very quick in eroding consumer trust and faith in this growing market.
Excellent. Well, good point on which to finish. Thanks so much to Simon, to Tom, to Nisha, to Emma, and of course to Avi from the ENA at the start. Thanks all for your questions. I'm so sorry we didn't manage to get through all of them, but we'll be sharing them with the panel, and hopefully we can get maybe some answers to you directly. As mentioned, this will be available on demand, so if you want to watch back anything, you can do. And of course, please do check out that Open Networks consultation and provide any thoughts that you may have, good or bad, on the current state of the market and how to grow it further. Just to wrap up, I mean, as we've heard from so many of our expert panelists, this really is a hugely important and exciting space. It was before, it's become even more so in recent months as we've seen the huge energy cost pressures and energy security threats that we face. There is no way to deliver a sort of net zero emission economy and no way to bring down the energy costs in the medium to long term without significant expansion of flexibility. And I think the big message here is this is not a technology for tomorrow or 5-10 years time. It is happening now. There are significant amounts of flexibility being tendered into these markets. There are really exciting pilot projects and indeed commercial scale projects now offering businesses and consumers the chance to save money and make money by matching their supply to demand. And it's only going to become more sophisticated, as Tom pointed out, as you get energy storage, as you get these really exciting vehicle to grid technologies that are going to allow us to do this in an automated fashion without any disruption to people's lives, whilst also bringing down emissions and crucially energy bills. So if you're a user of energy, and of course we all are, if you have whether it's electric heating or air conditioning unit or simply lights, there's probably a way in which you can get involved on some level and see if there's a potential there to save some money, make some money, cut some emissions, and help support the net zero transition. So if you haven't already, do check out or try and engage with some of the many companies that are now involved in this space and see if we can all help deliver that smarter, more flexible grid. That's it from me. Thanks again to all our panelists. Thanks for watching. Do check out that consultation, hopefully provide some responses, and hopefully we'll join you again soon for the next Business Green webinar. And of course, our final thanks to Energy Networks Association for supporting this event. Oh, and finally, I forgot one last thing. If you're not signed up already, Net Zero Festival happening in person, not an online webinar, actual people in an actual room on the 28th and 29th of September. So if you haven't check out Business Green, and please do sign up to that if you haven't already. We'd love to see as many of you as possible there. Excellent. That is it from me really this time. Goodbye and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.